It was a quiet afternoon in Tampa, Florida. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city. Tom Brady, the legendary quarterback, was enjoying a rare day off. No practices, no interviews, no film sessions, just a chance to unwind and recharge. Dressed casually in a plain white t-shirt, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, he looked like any other guy running errands. But beneath that unassuming exterior was a man whose discipline, physical prowess, and mental toughness had made him one of the greatest athletes of all time. Brady had just finished a light workout at a local gym. His body, though no longer in its 20s, was still a testament to years of meticulous training and nutrition. At 45, he moved with the agility and confidence of someone half his age. As he walked down the street, he thought about the little things he often missed during the football season. Simple pleasures like grabbing a coffee, browsing a bookstore, or picking up a few groceries without being recognized. That's when he noticed the small convenience store on the corner. It was one of those neighborhood spots, the kind with a flickering neon sign and a bell that jingled when the door opened. Brady decided to pop in for a bottle of water and maybe a snack. He pushed the door open, the bell chiming softly, and stepped inside. The store was cozy, with narrow aisles packed with shelves of snacks, drinks, and household essentials. A few customers were scattered around, a young mother with her toddler, an elderly man reading the label on a can of soup, and a college student browsing the energy drinks. Behind the counter stood a friendly clerk, chatting with a customer about the weather. The atmosphere was calm, almost sleepy. Brady grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and made his way to the snack aisle. He was scanning the shelves for a protein bar when he heard the door burst open. The bell jingled violently, and the calm of the store was shattered. Two men stormed in, their faces covered with black ski masks. One of them brandished a handgun, while the other carried a duffel bag. The one with the gun shouted, "Everyone on the ground, now!" His voice was sharp, panicked, and filled with menace. The customers froze, their eyes wide with fear. The young mother clutched her child tightly, while the elderly man dropped the can of soup he'd been holding. The college student raised his hands instinctively, his energy drink clattering to the floor. The clerk behind the counter hesitated for a moment before slowly raising his hands. Brady, standing at the back of the store, felt his heart rate spike. His mind raced, but his body remained still. He had faced pressure before, countless times on the football field, with millions of eyes watching and the weight of expectations on his shoulders. But this was different. This wasn't a game. Lives were at stake. The second assailant, the one with the duffel bag, started yelling at the clerk to open the cash register. His voice was shaky, and his hands trembled as he held the bag open. The gunman, meanwhile, kept his weapon trained on the customers, his eyes darting nervously around the room. Brady assessed the situation with the precision of a quarterback reading a defense. He noticed the gunman's nervous energy, the way his finger hovered dangerously close to the trigger. He saw the duffel bag guy fumbling with the cash, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. These weren't seasoned criminals. They were desperate, and that made them even more dangerous. The young mother let out a stifled sob, her child whimpering in her arms. The sound seemed to unsettle the gunman, who swung his weapon toward her. "Shut up!" he barked, his voice cracking under the strain. Brady knew he had to act. He couldn't just stand there and watch this unfold. But how? The gunman was too far away, and any sudden movement could provoke him. Brady's mind flashed back to his training, not just the physical drills, but the mental preparation. He had spent years learning to stay calm under pressure, to think clearly when everything around him was chaos. He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the store for anything he could use to his advantage. The aisles were narrow, which could work in his favor. The shelves were stocked with items that could serve as distractions or even weapons, but he needed a plan, and he needed it fast. The gunman was growing more agitated, pacing back and forth as he kept his weapon trained on the customers. The duffel bag guy, meanwhile, was stuffing cash into the bag, his movements frantic and uncoordinated. Brady realized that if he was going to make a move, it had to be now. He crouched low, staying out of the gunman's line of sight, and began to inch his way toward the front of the store. His muscles were coiled, ready to spring into action. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, sharpening his focus and heightening his senses. As he moved, he caught the eye of the college student, who was still standing with his hands raised. Brady gave him a subtle nod, a silent signal to stay calm and be ready. The student's eyes widened in understanding, and he gave a barely perceptible nod in return. Brady was now just a few feet away from the gunman. He could see the man's finger twitching on the trigger, the sweat dripping down his neck. This was it. It was now or never. The chapter ends with Brady poised to strike, the tension in the store reaching a breaking point. The gunman, unaware of the danger lurking behind him, continued to shout orders at the terrified customers. Brady's heart pounded in his chest as he prepared to make his move, knowing that one wrong step could mean disaster. The air in the convenience store was thick with tension. Every second felt like an eternity as Tom Brady crouched low behind a shelf, his mind racing but his body steady. He could hear the gunman's heavy breathing, the sound of his boots scuffing against the floor as he paced nervously. The duffel bag guy was still fumbling with the cash register, his hands shaking as he stuffed bills into the bag. The customers were frozen in fear, their eyes darting between the assailants and Brady, who was now their only hope. Brady's heart pounded in his chest, but his breathing remained controlled. Years of playing in high-pressure situations had taught him how to stay calm when it mattered most. He knew that one wrong move could escalate the situation, but he also knew he couldn't stand by and do nothing. He had to act, and he had to act now. He glanced around the store, quickly assessing his options. The aisles were narrow, which meant the gunman wouldn't have much room to maneuver if Brady could get close enough. The shelves were stocked with items that could serve as distractions or even weapons. His eyes landed on a display of canned goods near the front of the store. If he could create a diversion, he might be able to catch the gunman off guard. Brady's mind flashed back to his days on the football field, where split-second decisions often meant the difference between victory and defeat. He had always been a master at reading defenses, anticipating movements, and staying one step ahead of his opponents. This was no different. The gunman was the quarterback of this situation, and Brady needed to intercept his plan. With a deep breath, Brady made his decision. He reached for a can of soup from the shelf beside him, his fingers wrapping around it tightly. He waited for the right moment, his eyes locked on the gunman, who was now shouting at the young mother to hand over her purse. "Give it to me," the gunman barked, his voice cracking under the strain. The mother hesitated, her hands trembling as she clutched her child. The gunman took a step closer, his weapon pointed directly at her. That was Brady's cue. In one fluid motion, he stood up and hurled the can of soup across the store. It sailed through the air, striking a display of soda bottles near the entrance with a loud crash. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and the gunman instinctively turned toward the noise, his weapon swinging in that direction. Brady didn't waste a second. He exploded into action, closing the distance between himself and the gunman in a matter of strides. His training and physical conditioning kicked in as he tackled the man with the precision of a linebacker. The gunman let out a grunt of surprise as he hit the ground, the weapon slipping from his grasp and skidding across the floor. The duffel bag guy spun around, his eyes wide with panic. "What the—" he started to say, but Brady was already moving. He grabbed the gunman by the collar and used his momentum to roll him into the second assailant, sending both men crashing into a display of snacks. Chips and candy bars rained down around them as they struggled to regain their footing. The customers screamed, scrambling to get out of the way. The young mother grabbed her child and ducked behind the counter, while the elderly man and the college student backed toward the exit. The clerk, still behind the counter, reached for the phone to call the police. Brady didn't let up. He knew he had to keep the assailants off balance. He grabbed a nearby broom and swung it like a bat, striking the duffel bag guy in the legs and sending him sprawling to the ground. The man cried out in pain, clutching his shin as the bag of cash spilled open, bills scattering across the floor. The gunman, meanwhile, was struggling to get up. He reached for the weapon, which had landed just a few feet away, but Brady was faster. He kicked the gun out of reach and delivered a swift punch to the man's jaw, knocking him back down. The gunman's head hit the floor with a dull thud, and he groaned, dazed but not unconscious. Brady stood over the two men, his chest heaving as adrenaline coursed through his veins. He could feel the eyes of the customers on him, their fear slowly giving way to relief. But he knew the situation wasn't over yet. The gunman was still a threat, and the duffel bag guy was clutching his leg, his face twisted in pain. "Stay down," Brady said, his voice calm but firm. He picked up the broom and held it like a weapon, ready to defend himself if necessary. The gunman glared at him, his eyes filled with rage, but he didn't move. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. The police were on their way. Brady kept his eyes on the assailants, his body tense and ready to react if they tried anything. He could hear the customers whispering behind him, their voices filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "Is everyone okay?" Brady asked, not taking his eyes off the gunman. "Yes," the young mother stammered, her voice trembling. Thank you so much." Brady nodded, his focus still on the task at hand. He knew the police would handle things from here, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. Not yet. The chapter ends with the police bursting into the store, their weapons drawn. Brady steps back, allowing them to take control of the situation. The customers are safe, the assailants are in custody, and Brady's quick thinking and physical prowess have once again proven that he's more than just a football legend. He's a hero. The convenience store was in chaos. The sound of the police sirens grew louder outside, but inside, the danger was far from over. The gunman, though dazed from Brady's punch, was still a threat. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes wild with desperation. The duffel bag guy, clutching his injured leg, was trying to crawl toward the scattered cash on the floor. Brady stood between them and the terrified customers, his body tense and ready for whatever came next. The gunman's eyes darted around the store, searching for his weapon. It had skidded under a shelf near the entrance, just out of reach. Brady noticed the man's gaze and stepped forward, blocking his path. "It's over," Brady said, his voice calm but firm. "Don't make this worse." But the gunman wasn't listening. With a snarl, he lunged at Brady, swinging a wild punch. Brady sidestepped easily, his reflexes honed from years of evading defenders on the football field. He grabbed the man's arm and twisted it behind his back, forcing him to his knees. The gunman cried out in pain, but Brady held him firmly. "Stay down," Brady growled, his voice low and commanding, but the gunman wasn't done. With a sudden burst of strength, he twisted out of Brady's grip and shoved him backward. Brady stumbled but didn't fall. He regained his balance just as the gunman charged at him again, this time tackling him to the ground. The two men crashed into a display of snacks, sending bags of chips and boxes of candy flying in all directions. Brady grunted as the gunman landed on top of him, but he quickly wrapped his arms around the man's torso, using his core strength to flip him over. Now on top, Brady pinned the gunman to the floor, his knees pressing into the man's shoulders. The gunman thrashed wildly, his fists swinging in every direction. One of his punches connected with Brady's jaw, sending a sharp pain through his face. Brady winced, but didn't let go. He couldn't afford to. He tightened his grip, his muscles straining as he fought to keep the man under control. Out of the corner of his eye, Brady saw the duffel bag guy crawling toward the gun. The man's face was twisted in pain, but his determination was clear. Brady knew he had to act fast. With a burst of energy, he slammed the gunman's head against the floor, stunning him just long enough to break free. Brady sprang to his feet and sprinted toward the duffel bag guy, who was now just inches away from the weapon. The man's fingers brushed against the gun, but before he could grab it, Brady kicked it out of reach. The gun skidded across the floor, coming to a stop near the feet of the college student, who quickly picked it up and held it awkwardly, his hands shaking. "Don't move!" the student shouted, his voice cracking with fear. He pointed the gun at the duffel bag guy, who froze in place, his hands raised in surrender. Brady turned his attention back to the gunman, who was struggling to his feet. The man's face was bloody and his movements were sluggish, but his eyes burned with rage. He charged at Brady again, but this time Brady was ready. He sidestepped the attack and delivered a powerful punch to the man's ribs, followed by an uppercut to his jaw. The gunman crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Breathing heavily, Brady stood over the two men, his fists clenched and his body tense. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he knew the fight wasn't over yet. The police were almost here, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. "Is everyone okay?" Brady asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. The customers nodded, their faces pale but relieved. The young mother hugged her child tightly, tears streaming down her face. The elderly man leaned against the counter, his hands trembling as he tried to catch his breath. The college student still held the gun, his knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. "You can put that down now," Brady said gently, nodding toward the weapon. The student hesitated for a moment before setting it on the counter and stepping away, his hands raised as if he were the one who had done something wrong. Brady picked up the gun and placed it safely behind the counter, out of reach. He then turned his attention to the two assailants, who were now both unconscious. He grabbed a roll of duct tape from a nearby shelf and used it to bind their hands and feet, ensuring they wouldn't be able to cause any more trouble. As he worked, the sound of the sirens grew louder, and within moments, the store was flooded with police officers. They rushed in, their weapons drawn, but quickly assessed the situation and took control. Brady stepped back, allowing them to do their job. "Are you okay?" one of the officers asked, eyeing Brady's bruised jaw and disheveled appearance. Brady nodded. "I'm fine. Just make sure everyone else is taken care of." The officer nodded and turned to the customers, who were now being escorted out of the store. The young mother stopped as she passed Brady, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved us." Brady gave her a small smile. "I just did what anyone would have done." But as he watched the customers being led to safety, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Not everyone could have handled that situation the way he did. His years of training, both physical and mental, had prepared him for this moment. And as the adrenaline began to fade, he felt a sense of pride, not just in what he had done, but in the knowledge that he had made a difference. The convenience store was now a scene of controlled chaos. Police officers moved methodically, securing the area and taking statements from the shaken customers. Paramedics had arrived, checking on everyone to ensure no one was seriously injured. The two assailants, now handcuffed and conscious, were being led out of the store. Their heads hung low as they avoided the glare of the cameras that had started to gather outside. Tom Brady stood near the counter, his breathing slowly returning to normal. A paramedic approached him, offering to check his bruised jaw and the cuts on his hands. Brady waved him off with a polite smile. "I'm fine," he said. "Make sure the others are okay first." The young mother, still holding her child, walked up to Brady, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved us. You saved my baby." Brady placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm just glad you're both safe," he replied. "That's all that matters." The elderly man, now sitting on a stool near the counter, nodded in agreement. "You've got the heart of a lion, son," he said, his voice steady despite the ordeal. "Not many people would have done what you did." Brady smiled humbly. "I just did what felt right." As the police finished their initial assessment, an officer approached Brady. "Mr. Brady, we're going to need a statement from you," he said. "But I have to say, what you did here today, it was incredible. You kept a bad situation from turning into a tragedy." Brady nodded. "I'll help in any way I can," he said. "But I hope those guys get the help they need. This isn't the way to solve problems." The officer looked at him with respect. "Not everyone thinks that way in the heat of the moment. You kept a level head, and because of that, no one got hurt. That's something to be proud of." Outside the store, news of the incident had spread like wildfire. Reporters and onlookers had gathered, their cameras flashing as they tried to catch a glimpse of the football legend who had become a real-life hero. Brady, however, wasn't interested in the spotlight. He slipped out through a back entrance, avoiding the crowd and the questions. Later that evening, Brady sat in his home, reflecting on the day's events. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from friends, teammates and fans, all praising his bravery. But Brady's thoughts were elsewhere. He thought about the young mother and her child, the elderly man, the college student, and even the two assailants. He wondered what had driven those men to such desperation and hoped they would find a better path forward. As he sat there, a sense of clarity washed over him. For years, he had been celebrated for his achievements on the football field, his 7 Super Bowl rings, his records, his legacy as the greatest quarterback of all time. But today had shown him that true greatness wasn't just about winning games or breaking records. It was about making a difference when it mattered most. It was about stepping up, even when the stakes were high and the odds were against you. Brady picked up his phone and typed out a message to share on social media. It was simple, but heartfelt. "Today reminded me that life is about more than football. It's about looking out for one another, standing up for what's right, and being there when people need you most. I'm grateful everyone is safe, and I hope this serves as a reminder that we all have the power to make a difference. Stay strong, stay kind, and take care of each other." The post quickly went viral, with millions of people praising Brady not just for his actions, but for his humility and compassion. But for Brady, the real reward was knowing that he had made a difference. He had used his strength, his training, and his mindset to protect others, and that, he realized, was the true measure of a champion.